are you doing now, Dave?
Well, FESPACO is the most important African film festival for African cinema here in Africa. It happens every 2 years and brings together films from all over the continent. This happens in Burkina Faso, so there's always a heavy representation of Burkina Faso films, which itself represents the fact that Burkina Faso has had this particularly vibrant relationship with cinema on the continent for the past 40 years. The festival has been going since the late 60s. We're also going to get films from North Africa, from Morocco, from Egypt, from Tunisia, films from South Africa, films from Mozambique, films from the rest of West Africa, Mali, Senegal, Benin, films from the centre of Africa, from Chad. East Africa is often less represented, but there are films in there from the eastern part of the continent as well. I'd say from a European perspective, one of the things that defines African cinema is just the lack of knowledge that there is about it. I mean, we don't get many African films in screens in Europe, certainly not in London. A little more in France, because Francophone African cinema has always been certainly one of the strongest elements of African cinema. But I think from a European perspective, it's the unknown element it's the unknown nature of African cinema that almost defines it. Obviously from an African perspective, that's entirely different, although there are still ongoing debates about access to African films by Africans, and every African filmmaker I've spoken to, it may not be their first reason for making films. Obviously they're storytellers, they're artists, but they're always concerned with the possibility of African audiences seeing their films, and also the problem of them sometimes not seeing them. I think sometimes, certainly for critics and cinephiles in Europe, there's a sense that African film is particularly urgent, is of the art house. But obviously, if you're here in Africa, that's not the case. I mean, the few African films that are distributed for us in Paris or London are usually of the sort that Cannes may programme or Venice may programme. There's smart, intelligent, prestige films, such as those by Abderrahmane Sissako from Mali, or Mahamat Saleh-Haroun from Chad. I mean, there are many more popular movies being made actually on the continent. I mean, the reputation of the Nigerian video film industry has grown hugely in the past few years, and that's certainly one that we're very aware of in Europe. Popular films, popular subjects, genre movies. What FESPACO shows you when you look through the programme and you start watching films here is a huge variety of films being made in Africa. You certainly can't pigeonhole films into one category or one style, and actually I'm particularly uncomfortable and feel the same discomfort from filmmakers that are talking about African cinema as a concept. And it's a huge continent, a great number of countries, great number of different stories, and that's represented in the cinema. So actually the whole idea of African cinema is a bit of a platitude, that it's handy as an introduction, but it's probably best to move away from and then start talking about individual stories, individual filmmakers, and individual films. And again, that's what FESPACO gives you. It gives you those individual stories. FESPACO was set up in the late 60s by filmmakers from the region. It was a very small festival in the early days, happened every 2 years as it does now, but it grew steadily through the 70s, but it was in the 80s that it really got a shot in the arm. The government here in Burkina Faso has always been the main supporter of the festival, the main funder of the festival, and that's something that's been more powerful since the mid-80s and has continued to be so. Without the Burkina Faso government, there'd be no FESPACO. The government here honours it as one of the big national events. They follow up that honour with cash, and it's now seen as the prestige event for African film, not just for African film in West Africa, but for African film absolutely. Looking around, I guess we're probably going to get about 60,000, 70,000 people in here. I just thought, and most of them are going to be regular folk from Ouagadougou. Filmmakers are going to be there, press are going to be there from all over the world. The president's going to be here with his entourage, but mostly this stadium is going to be full of people who see and recognise and enjoy FESPACO as a national event. That's not to say that the cinemas are going to be full with all the 70,000 people here over the next 2 weeks, but I think it's an event which people are aware of and celebrate, even if they're not packing out the cinemas. Just looking through the programme, there are at least 10 cinemas being used this year across the city, and maybe more actually, because it's one of those festivals that has its formal side and then has its very informal side as well. I mean, so there are standard cinemas we're going to be in. There's the Cine Burkina, the Cine Nirawana, which are local cinemas, but there are also key open-air cinemas as well, which are used. There's one which we'll see called the Cine Febuary, which has been used by the festival since the beginning in the late 60s. A great open-air space right in the centre of town that, I mean, it looks to me that it takes a good few hundred people, rows of benched seats in the front and then individual seats at the back that look like they've been moved from a football stadium. Fading, but brilliant. The film's projected against a whitewashed wall at the front. And obviously the films start there after dark, so they squeeze a couple in each evening. There are other smaller screenings happening in areas on the edge of town as well, and it's those screenings, I think, where you'll find less press, less industry, less teams of filmmakers, and actually find that regular audiences from the city are going out to see films. And there's also a programme travelling films as well that happens after the festival finishes in April and actually goes around the country, and especially to the second city as well. So it's a festival that really spreads its wings around the city and also tries to spread its wings around the country as well. One of Burkina Faso's leading filmmakers is Gaston Kabore, who we've met out here. We've spoken to a lot before coming here to Burkina Faso as well. He's pretty best described as one of the elder statesmen of cinema here in Burkina Faso. He's been making films himself since he was in his 20s, in the late 70s. He occupies a really interesting position as partly he is a filmmaker, but partly a filmmaker and partly a diplomat. I mean, as well as making feature films and short films, since the age of 25, he's been assuming and been appointed to positions in which he can be an advocate of African cinema, both here in Burkina Faso, across the continent, and across the world, really. He's been at the head of various organisations, which means that he's had to go out there and fight the corner for African film. I mean, he's a fighter, although if you meet him, he's the most gentle, wise, smart man you can come across. He doesn't come across as a fighter at all. But you can tell that he's got that determination and enthusiasm, which he's brought to, as he was telling me the other evening, he's brought to meetings with countless cultural ministers across Africa when he's gone into their offices and told them and wagged his finger at them and told them how much money they should be spending and how much enthusiasm and energy they should be putting into cinema in their countries. Well, Gaston Kabore, as well as being a filmmaker and as well as travelling the world and arguing the case for African cinema, he decided, going back I think almost 20 years now informally, to set up his own film school here in Ouagadougou called Imagine. It's less of a film school in the traditional sense of students coming along to learn the very basic crafts of filmmaking. He takes small groups of students from across the world, really, although mainly from Africa, who already have some experience of film or television, and he develops their skills in particular areas with trainers and teachers he brings in to his school. He founded Imagine in the 90s. He started building the building in which it's now housed on the edge of the city in 91, he told me the other day. He lives in there now, but he officially opened it in 98, so it's been going for over a decade. During FESPACO, Gaston's hosting a workshop, Imagine, under the title of Myths and Legends, and he's bringing in filmmakers, writers, film academics, and other practitioners, again from across the world. A select group, I think of about 10, who are going to be meeting with a small group of students. I met one young woman the other night who travelled by bus from Lagos. She was back for her second workshop at Imagine. She'd been here at FESPACO in 2009. And Gaston gathers these people together, and he's holding a 3-day workshop. As I say, this year it's under the title Myths and Legends. Two of the filmmakers who were bound to come across here at FESPACO, Newton Aduaka, a filmmaker from Nigeria, and Jean-Pierre Bekolo, who's a filmmaker from Cameroon. Both of those were prize winners back in 2007 at FESPACO 4 years ago. Newton Aduaka won the Golden Stallion of Unenga, which is the main prize for the festival, for a film called Ezra, which was a really hard-hitting drama about child soldiers in an unnamed African country, but it certainly seemed to reflect recent events then in Rwanda. Newton is a graduate of the London Film School, born in Nigeria, moved to Britain and studied at London Film School, and is based out of Paris, making all sorts of films, making documentary shorts, and Ezra was a dramatic feature. He'll be here. He's heading up the short films jury. Another filmmaker, Jean-Pierre Bekolo from Cameroon. He won the Silver Award, I believe, in 2007 at FESPACO for a film called Les Saignants, which was for me, broke a lot of expectations of what you expect from African cinema. It brought in elements of gore and horror into a local story. Real unusual mixing of genres. Jean-Pierre Bekolo is here, and he's on the main feature jury, so he'll be one of the number of jurors who are watching the 18 films in competition for the Golden Stallion and the Vienenga. In the context of recent political events, this sounds fascinating. Burkina Faso film called Waiting for the Vote, and it says that after 21 years of absolute power in a Gulf republic, President Koyaga, victim of an assassination attempt, real this time, goes in his village to refuge. I think it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out as Libya still dominates the news. The political element of these films will certainly be things that I think the audiences here will be looking for this year, and certainly I'll be looking for as well. But I think we should also expect to see family dramas, very local, non-political issues and themes playing out as well, just because the certain elements of the continent and the north hotbed of political story at the moment doesn't necessarily mean that cinema is going to reflect that, I think. And I think and certain African films from I'm aware of in the past. I mean, we were talking about Haroun from Chad, very wisely deal with grand political themes in very, very small, intimate, wise ways that aren't explicitly political.